My name is Pat Smith, and I'm the director of the Allen County Museum. And my introduction to Duke Murray and his son Rob came about in kind of a peculiar way. We got an email here a few months back at the museum from a gentleman in Chicago telling us that he had heard a story on NPR in Chicago about the Allen County Museum. And I'm like, whoa, we hit the big time. They're telling people in Chicago about our wonderful museum here in Lima. Well, that began some correspondence back and forth between Rob Murray and myself. And I could not have been more delighted when he shared with me some of the reminiscences that his father had started putting together over the last several months. And they made me laugh out loud, and they made me get tears in my eyes, and it was just a fabulous, fabulous correspondence. So when he told me that his father was coming here for a reunion, I said, gee, let's put our thinking caps on. So right now, I'd like to introduce to you my new pen pal from Chicago, Rob Murray.
Thank you, Pat. We're all just thrilled to be here in Lima, and the Murray family has always just loved Lima, and Dad has had just so many stories that he's told us over the years about growing up here, and he has finally put them down on paper, and he's got a book, and the book will be out probably, we're thinking September 15th, maybe a little before, and we have a prototype of the book. This is kind of what it's going to look like, but it's going to have a regular spine on it. It isn't going to have this coil. And it'll be available here at the museum gift shop. You'll also be able to order it on the internet, and we'll tell you at the end of the program more how to obtain this. It has 35 stories, and a lot of them the kids in the Murray family have heard many times over the years. Sometimes a few too many times. But, some good pictures in the book too, and a lot of Dad's thoughts, and just good information about Lima, especially in the 1930s during the Depression. And I am Dad and Mom's second child, second son, and I live in Chicago, as Pat said, and I'm a computer instructor. I do software training, and I wonder how many people here use email. Probably most people here. Well, 10 years ago, I was afraid Dad was going to get left out of the internet, and I didn't know how I was ever going to get him to like email because he sure didn't like computers. So, and me being in the computer field, this was a tough thing. So we got him a web TV, which was a great little appliance to plug in and be able to start using email on. And when later on he started getting interested in memoirs and writing some of his stories down, he would just write himself a long email, and that would be one of his stories. And that was kind of a good start. I was able to take those and work them up into the book form, and I think you'll see it's a pretty nice form. We actually have 5 or 6 of these we're going to kind of pass around towards the end of the program so you can see them, but we know if we pass them around now, you'll just be looking at them, so we got to kind of put a kibosh on that. So, my role in the process has just been kind of like an editor, you might say, somebody to help get these stories in shape and sort of put them in a good book format, and also encourage Dad to kind of get a few more out so we can finish the book. And so what you'll see is at the end of the program, or whenever the end is for you, we have a handout up here, and this handout is a kind of a summary of the book. You might say a little book review. And then inside of it, it shows you all the chapters, and they give you a good idea of what the book is all about. There's, as I say, 35 stories. Then we have excerpts from 6 of what I thought were the best ones. And of course, they just lead up to a suspenseful moment, and they just leave you hanging, so don't be surprised. And then the last page shows you how to get a hold of the book when it does come out, and we think it's not going to be too long from now. So I asked you about email. I'd also like to ask you how many people here have never actually met Dr. Murray in person. Could I see those hands? Okay. Well, you've got an experience ahead of you. Dad has been described in many ways. I'm not so sure I should get into him. But he's definitely a wonderful guy. He's always full of stories. He's a very witty man. And you never quite know what he's going to come up with next. what's going to happen with our program today is that we wanted to kind of try to make it interactive and discuss throughout, but we think there are probably a few too many of us to try that. So there are 5 stories, and they're going to be read by all the people who had something to do with putting the book together. The first story will be read by Dad. He is going to tell you about some things he learned from a boyhood chum when he went to horseman school. Dad's very fond of horseman, talks a lot in the book about it, so anybody who went to horseman, this is your book, because he just loves horseman. And the second story will be read by Mom. Mom's a wonderful reader and always has been. She's read to us when we were very small and just always kept it up. And she's going to read about Dad's comical neighbor, Perry. He's an unusual neighbor, and we just saw his house yesterday for the first time. Dad took us over to his stomping ground over on Hazel Avenue, and we actually, I'm turning 50 years old. I'd never seen this area before, so it was quite a lot of fun to see it. And then one of our real allies in our project has been Jean Engstrom, who writes the column in the Lima News, the garden clippings, and she's been so helpful to let people know about the book and to share things. And we're hoping maybe someday we'll even have the Lima News be interested in running a chapter or 2 from the book, just as a little serial or something like that. But she's going to read her favorite story, A Saturday Night in Lima, 1930 style. Our Dad wants me to say, live from Lima, it's Saturday night. And then I'm going to read a short story to you about some of Dad's best friends in his life when he was a kid, who happened to be dogs. And you'll hear about those. Then Dad will talk about his Uncle Charlie, one of his favorite people ever, and how wonderful he loved being on the farm, what wonderful times he had on the farm with Uncle Charlie and Aunt Lou and his cousin Roberta, who's here. And so, without too much further ado, what I want to do is introduce you to Dad, and he's going to read to you. He's going to read you a story called What I Learned from a Boyhood Chum, and then he has some very special introductions. So without further ado, here's my father, Dr. Emmett Murray.
Okay. What's this? I suppose you wonder why I've called you all here together today. It's really a thrill to come back to Lima. And a little over a week ago, Mike Lackey called me on the phone down at Fort Myers. And I guess that Pat Smith had given him her copy of my book to read. And he read it, and he said he just wanted to corroborate things a little bit. Mike's a very careful researcher. He doesn't print everything that he sees until he's investigated it, and so he just wanted to chat and said, could I give him 5 minutes? Well, 20 minutes later, we finally finished, and Mike was asking me a lot of questions about why I came back to Lima, and when I got out of medical school, why I talked about becoming a radiologist and staying in Columbus and so forth, but came back here to intern at St. Rita's, and I told him that, you can take a boy out of the country, but you can't take country out of the boy, and you can take a boy out of Lima, but you can't take Lima out of that boy. Like I told Mike, I said, Lima has had a bad name. Lots of times it was called Lost in Middle America. And I said Lima got knocked to the canvas, but Lima never failed to answer the bell for the next round. And I think they should change that to Leading in America, not Lost in America. So with that, yeah, okay. I see you want me to get on with things.
When you're ready.
Oh, okay. Rob, I do want to introduce Polly. She was my helpmate, and she's been my biggest booster. Stand up, Polly. as you'll see, she is a great reader, and she used to read, punctuate, spell check, and cheerlead all at the same time. And then, of course, Rob, as you know, when I got a few of those things to him, he put me on a website, and so people have asked me about him, and I said, well, he's the ramrod behind this. Well, Bob didn't like that. He thought that sounded like he was prodding me. So I said, well, how about spearhead? He said he didn't like that either. So we finally settled on he's my expediter. And of course, Jean Engstrom is the sine qua non. She's just been great for us, and she has been one of my cheerleaders. And so she's given us $1 million worth of publicity in the Lima News. And but then I also have with us, and I like them to stand up, Roberta and Charles Rodabaugh. They're sitting back there. Roberta is my country cousin. She used to refer to me as a city cousin. She was my Uncle Charlie and Aunt Lula's daughter, and she did many nice things for me, a few not so nice. I was in a bathing suit one time, and she took me down to the creek and didn't show me where the horse nettles were, and I got into the horse nettles. And if you've ever been in horse nettles, you'll never forget it, I tell you. So, but anyway, we've been commuting, and it was her father and her mother who taught me what little I know about farming, and I've been so glad for it. Now, over here on my right is my sister, Mary and Val Koskowski, and we have a signer, Miss Tana Holler, who is signing for them. They are graduates of the Ohio State School for the Deaf. Yeah, they've been married 57 years. So now then, we also, I have to preface this a little bit. I don't know how many of you here remember that Dr. Grannis and I started our office. We had a third guy, Dr. Fox, who could only stand it for 3 years, and he went back to Philadelphia and took a radiology residency for hard work. And so we took a young fella in who had come from Huron Roads Hospital in Cleveland down to Memorial for a year's training. And he was a trained anesthesiologist, but he wanted to also do family medicine. And he, after his year at Memorial, we had a vacancy, and so Dr. Kendall Old Burns came with us. And he was really quite a good addition to our duo, our duet. He gave anesthetics, he made house calls, he saw patients in the office, he delivered babies. He did everything a family doctor should. Unfortunately, he was taken from us in a fatal accident almost a year to the day we hired him in with us, and he left a widow and 2 children, Dennis and Diane. Well, Dennis and Diane and Peggy Burns stayed in Lima, and they went to the school here, and Dennis went through Lima Senior, and he was in the Music Man, pacing up and down, saying they don't know the territory, they don't know the territory. And then Peg moved to Texas. And Dennis went to Baylor to pre-medical school, finished that, and then he went to Southwestern Medical School in Texas and finished that. And then he decided he didn't want to become a rat doctor, so he was going to be an internist until he was working someplace, and a guy who was on his way to radiation therapy for a lung cancer, asked him if he had a light for his cigarette. I think right then Dennis decided that wasn't for him either. So Dennis became a neuropathologist, and he is now professor of neuropathology at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Professor Burns, would you please stand up? There he is. Sit down, Dennis. You know, in medical school, I always wanted to tell a professor to sit down, but I never had the guts. So, also, I want to mention, if anybody in this audience was a patient of Dr. Burns or knew Dr. Burns in any way, would they please seek Dennis out at the end of this program? He's hungering for information about his dad, and he would be eternally grateful for any information that you can give him. Now we have cut this a little short here. Got daughter Betsy. Where's Betsy? Oh, there she is. And her son, our grandson Jeff Fowler. They're from Upper Michigan, or north of Detroit, Shelby Township. Yeah. And I have Cindy Hamlin. Oh, there she is. Yeah, she's up from South Carolina. And has they got everybody now, Ron?
It's got Nancy.
Oh, yes. And our son Scott. Our son Scott here, doctor, and his wife Nancy Winters. You see, we were going to surprise Rob, and we're having a birthday party for him tonight, a premature birthday party, and he wasn't to know that Scott and Nancy were coming. And so we kept it from him and kept it from me too. So, well, now I've got to get down to my outline job here. I want to talk to you about what I learned from a boyhood chum. What's the matter? Okay. Is that all right? Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? You know, I have AIDS. I have hearing aids in both ears. You know, at our reservation down in Florida, they have a, what? At our reservation down in Florida, huh?
Up. We need a technician up here. Knows what he's doing.
You got nothing to do with that one. This is perfect.
Is that better?
Yeah, this is for a different purpose.
Oh, I see.
What do I do with this? Do I play them both?
Just go ahead.
Oh, no, wait a minute. Maybe it's my ear things that are ringing.
What's that?
Oh. See that? Now what?
Just try it. Hello?
Maybe I'll have Mrs. Holler come over and sign this message for us. Oh, I did. Did I introduce?
Yes, you did.
Oh, okay. Oh, anyway, at this meeting we were at, it was a kind of a quarterly meeting, and there was a lot of talking going on, and I hadn't heard anything going on. And finally, at the end, the gal says, "Is there anything else to come before the committee?" And I put my hand up, and I was new in the group, and she called on me, and I stood up, and I said, "I have AIDS." Boy, everybody looked around. I said, "I have hearing aids in both ears, and I didn't hear 80% of what you people said." So then they got a microphone. So, and it didn't ring either. So, well, as we make our way through life, some person or some experience will frequently leave footprints on the beaches. I hate to say this, but can you hear me now? Can't hear? They can't
I
hear.
think you're okay. Just try, just sail into it and we'll see.
Well, I'm gonna see where I was. Well, I often see that people will frequently leave footprints on the beaches of our memories. Oftentimes, these footprints are washed away. What?
It's off. It's off. Up.
Is that it?
Try it again.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? They can hear me, right?
I think so.
Okay. These footprints remain imprinted on our memories. These may not be footprints of a celebrity or a teacher or an important person, those of a great historical or monumental experience. Sometimes they are just impressions left by a person we considered a friend at the time, or even just an acquaintance. Such a person was a boyhood friend of mine who was a second grader when I first met him, and he began walking the beaches of my memory. In the interest of his privacy and that of others, I called him Eldon. Eldon lived about 3 blocks west of me on Hazel Avenue, in a neighborhood that had predated my neighborhood by 20 or 30 years, although the homes in that area were older and some were a little dilapidated, but most were fairly well maintained. Eldon lived in a 1-floor home with his mother, father, and younger sister, Betty. Eldon's father was a coal hauler for the Lima Ice and Coal Company. I first met Eldon as he walked past my house on his way to Horseman Elementary School. I began walking with him to and from school twice a day because we went home for our lunch. And about 2 blocks west of Eldon's house on Hazel Avenue, dead-ended into a large woods owned by a Mr. Baxter. As we would walk and talk, Eldon told me of some of his expeditions and explorations into the woods. He soon had my curiosity up and got my eagerness to share his adventures up to a fevered pitch. One fall day, he asked me if I would like to go hickory nut hunting with him after school, and I eagerly responded that I'd love to go. We stopped at my house where I introduced Eldon to my mom and told her what we planned to do. I got her permission to go, and while I changed into my exploring and nut hunting clothes, Mom talked with Eldon and told him that she knew his father because he would occasionally deliver coal to our house. Mom gave me a cloth 10-pound sugar sack to store my booty in. And so we went to Eldon's house, and I met his mother and waited on the front porch while he changed clothes. At this point, I must tell you that Eldon wore round black horn-rimmed glasses and looked just like the Harry Potter of today. This was 65 years ago. Not only that, his mom wore identical black horn-rimmed glasses and looked like what would have been Harry Potter's mother.
We need magic about now.
Now,
Try that.
well, how's that? Well, off we went to Baxter's Woods. We climbed, okay. We climbed the gate and entered the enchanted forest. As we went along, Eldon pointed out the various trees: hickory, walnut, beech, oak, birch, and the horse chestnut or the buckeye. We had great nut hunting and filled our sacks with nice hulled hickory nuts, being careful to discard the ones that had wormholes. This day was just the first of many forays into the wonderland of Baxter's Woods. In addition to the nuts, we found bittersweet to take home to our moms. In the winter, Eldon told me to bring my sled, and we went deep into the woods and came to an area near the Pennsylvania Railroad. There was a big, large culvert there, and a nice sliding hill with a pond at the bottom. There was also a hobo's camp there, where we would build a fire and roast potatoes in foil while we sledded. I never saw Eldon much in summer, being busy with the boys in my neighborhood, playing baseball, roller skating, and all the many things that grade school boys do. When the school year resumed in the fall, Eldon would start walking by, and our friendship would take up where it had left off in the spring. Once in the 4th grade, Eldon didn't come by for a couple days, so I walked down to his house to see him, and froze in my tracks when I saw a big black wreath by the front door. Back then, when someone died, their body lay in state in the living room or the parlor for friends and relatives to pay their respects. The black wreath announced the wake of Eldon's mom, who had had cancer and died. Eldon had never told me anything about it. Needless to say, my chum was markedly depressed, and we would walk to school in silence. He never cried or said much, but I guess it helped just to have someone with whom to walk. In January, when the snows began to be heavy, Eldon and I formed a partnership to shovel snow from people's walks. I would knock on the door while Eldon would begin shoveling. I would negotiate a price, and then we would clean the walks and split the fee. That's the first case of fee splitting in Allen County. Oftentimes, we would go to a grocery store or a bakery after we'd finished shoveling for the day and reward ourselves. I noticed that Eldon would frequently spend everything he had earned that day. I asked him once why he didn't save some for a rainy day. It was then that he told me that his dad most often came home drunk, and if Eldon had any money, his dad would take it from him and buy more beer with it. So Eldon would spend it all beforehand. Is this water? Here. There. Later, Eldon built himself a treehouse beside his garage. Then he'd keep his money in a tobacco can in the treehouse because his dad wouldn't climb up to the treehouse. Our friendship flourished throughout the grade school years, but when we got to high school, we were on different tracks. He was in general studies course, and I was in the college prep course that my older brother had outlined for me. I gradually lost track of Eldon, and don't remember seeing him after graduation. When I was preparing to write this story, I called a friend who is our class historian and asked him if he knew about Eldon, and he said he could vaguely remember him and said that he would search his yearbooks and get back to me. I told him about the glasses, and when he called me back, he said that Harry Potter jumped right off the page at him in a picture from 1943. He said that Eldon had joined the Navy, which may have been his way out of the house, or it may have been the draft, I don't know. And he became an electrician's mate, moved to Illinois, married, had 6 children. I think he moved back in the Lima area because, if I'm not mistaken, one of his children, whom he named Murray, met with son Rob, and told him that we were almost relatives. At any rate, Errol was reported deceased on our 25th class reunion, which would have made him about 43 or 44 years old. And so, as I said in the beginning, sometimes the footprints of memory are not washed away by the tides of time. The recent pictures of Harry Potter have been popular and have jogged my memory and reminded me of a chum who taught me many things. From Eldon, I learned how to identify the hickory, the walnut, beech, maple, and oak trees in Baxter's Woods. And from Eldon, I learned that life is not always fair. It's not fair for a 10-year-old boy to lose his mother and be forced to endure such harsh circumstances at home. I learned that not every kid is as lucky as I was to have a mom and dad and brothers and a sister who loved me. This was more effective than reading about it in a social studies book. And lastly, I learned that sometimes it helps just to walk with your friend in silence. That's it. Should I tell them anything about Baxter's Woods now or not? Not right now. All right. Don't take my paperclip.
Our next reader has read to our family for a long time, and she's a wonderful dramatic reader, and I'd like to introduce my mother, Polly Murray.
Hello, hello. It's singing a little.
It'll be all right. Just go ahead.
Okay.
And
All right, I'll
adjust
try
it
to
if
talk
we need
loud. All right. This title of this is called Our Comical Neighbor Perry. That's Duke's neighbor. My father built our house some 10 or 12 years before I was born in 1925. It was a good house with a nice front porch and swing. We had a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, a back porch on the first floor. And on the second floor were 3 bedrooms and a full bathroom, a full basement where Mom could hang her washing in bad weather, and there was a coal bin by the furnace. The back porch housed our ice box, which my dad built. We had a dining booth out there that we ate in the summertime, where we ate in the summertime. Our dining room had a swinging door to the kitchen and a window that looked out into the backyard. There were 3 windows above the buffet, and they looked across the neighbor's driveway into the 3 windows above their kitchen sink. It was at these windows that our neighbor, a Mr. Perry Anderson, used to tap to get our attention at supper time. He entertained my sister and me with outlandish grimaces and funny faces. And as the story unfolds, you'll meet one of the most unforgettable characters, and I mean characters, in my life. Perry and Blanche Anderson were my neighbors, and I, as a child, never call them anything other than Mr. and Mrs. Anderson when I addressed them. But in the privacy of our home, it was Perry and Blanche, and for brevity's sake, I refer to them as Perry and Blanche in my story. They were both born in Bluffton, Ohio, about 15 miles from Lima. Bluffton was known for its Mennonite college, which is still growing strong today. After college, Perry attended the College of Law at Ohio Northern. Blanche and Perry married late in life and never had any children. They were the only neighbors I knew to occupy their house in the 17 years that I lived next door. Blanche was a staunch Pentecostal church member, but I never remember seeing Perry go to church. He was, nevertheless, a mild-mannered man and never swore. The only expletive I ever heard him utter if he was aggravated was piffle. I don't think he drank alcohol. His only vice was that he smoked cigars, and Blanche wouldn't let him smoke in the house, so he smoked on the front porch or out in the backyard. Perry had his idiosyncrasies, one of which was to shout, "Oh, yeah." Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, there. Neither Perry nor Blanche drove an automobile. Blanche had a sister who married a banker in town, and she used to come and visit Blanche in a little electric phaeton. Perry's law office was downtown, and he had to walk a couple of blocks to catch the streetcar to go to work. When the electric streetcars were phased out, Perry really had it made because the city bus began to stop right across the street from his house. Perry did mostly deeds and wills and absolutely refused to handle the divorce case. He would have his secretary show clients the door if they even mentioned divorce. Perry's one passion was fishing. Since he had no automobile, he was dependent upon his fishing buddies for transportation. His closest friend, a man named Harry Wright, and his wife, who lived on a farm not far from town. Every couple of years, Perry and friends would take a trip to their favorite place, Lake Mindemoya, on the Manitoulin Island in Lake Huron. Now, back in the 30s, that was a major undertaking. Many were the hours I spent on his front porch, listening to him tell how they would drive up to Mackinac and take a ferry across the Straits of Mackinac to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Then they drive on to Sault Ste. Marie. They cross over into Canada and head east on Highway 17 to Thessalon. And from there they took a little train to Little Current on the Manitoulin Island, where they were be met by horses and wagons for the final trip to Lake Minnemoya and their cottage at Maple Grove Resort. Since Perry didn't furnish a car during the driving, it was his responsibility to provide the night crawlers, or as the Canadians call them, the dew-worms. And that's where I came into the picture. I was the Andersons' boy in residence. I mowed their lawn with the reel type push mower for 50 cents a week. Perry liked the grass kept short, so when he and I would stalk the lightning fast night crawlers, it would be easier to grab them. He'd water the grass in his front yard, and I'd water the grass in our front yard. And then about 9 o'clock at night, we'd both get on our hands and knees with the flashlight in one hand, grabbing the elusive night crawlers with the other hand. I had trouble titling this piece. I didn't know whether to call it Hunting Night Crawlers for Fun and Profit, or What Do Dew-Worms Do at Night? On Sunday afternoons, Perry would whistle for me and my good old Beagle's Queen. Armed with buckets and trowels, we would walk the couple of blocks west to Baxter's Woods. There we would search the north side of all the oak, beech, hickory, and walnut trees for the soft green moss growing there. We'd harvest all the moss we could, place it in buckets, and head for home. At home, Perry would take over. He would sort and grade the moss and add water to it to ensure that it was the worms would be added, so to make sure it would be find a hospitable habitat. Since Perry had no car, his garage was the perfect workplace for him to sort the worms, small, medium, and large, and to discard the sickly-looking ones. He would hold weekly inspections as we would gather more dew-worms and prepare them for the long trip. Perry was always searching for easier ways to harvest night crawlers, and here I must digress a bit so that this saga can continue. My mother loved black walnuts, but the hulls on them were quite adherent and tough to get off. So she devised a unique way of cracking the outer hull and removing the walnut. She'd get a large burlap bag, fill it about half full with the nuts in their hulls, flatten them out in a sack, run her car over the sack back and forth. The car wheels just peel the hulls right off the nuts. And then she would put on heavy rubber gloves and pick the walnuts and throw them into a wash tub. She'd fill the tub with water to rinse off the staining walnut juice so as not to get the stain on her hands. She could dispose of the burlap bag with the hulls and finish up by pouring out the rinse water onto the grass in the backyard. And shortly thereafter, the grass would be alive with night crawlers, even in the daytime. The juice apparently irritated them, and out they came. Of course, this happened in the fall and was of no benefit to Perry, but we did tell and show him the results. He filled several mason jars with the juice from some of his own subsequent washings and saved them in his basement. The next summer, Perry got out his walnut juice and poured a couple of jars into it in the middle of his front yard. Nothing happened. The next day when he awakened, there was a huge brown area of dead grass in the middle of the yard. He hadn't diluted the walnut juice as much as we had, and it killed his grass. He couldn't get grass to grow there for a couple of years. The next thing Perry did to try to get the night crawlers to come out was a miserable failure, too. Someone had given him a surefire worm extractor. It was a long electric cord with a male plug on one end to insert it into an electric socket. At the other end, the cord split into two separate wires, each with a wooden insulating handle and a long, stiff wire probe. The idea was to wet the grass in yard, then insert the probes into the turf about 2 or 3 feet apart, and then plug in the electric outlet. Perry had given the electric plug to Blanche and told her not to plug it in until she heard him holler. I came up just as Perry had picked up the probes and was preparing to stick them into the turf. I asked Perry if he was trying something new, and he gave out one of his,
Oh, yeah.
Blanche thought that was her signal, so she plugged plug that cord into the socket. About that time, Perry inadvertently touched the two probes together, and there was a blinding flash, and all the lights in the Anderson house went off. Well, the payoff for me was always when Perry would get home from his fishing trip. In the evenings after supper, Perry would hold court on his front porch where I sat on the swing. Between puffs on his cigar, he would hold me in fascination with tale after tale of the walleyes, jumbo perch, whitefish, and northern pike that had been caught. He'd tell of the storms that drove them off the water and of the mosquitoes. I always hoped that I could get invited on one of these trips, but it never happened. But at least I learned what dewworms do at night. And I made 50 cents a week mowing Perry's grass.
We wanted to just thank Mom for reading, of course. And I want to say my sister Betsy is one of the most considerate people I know, and she told me in the beginning of this program, now be sure you acknowledge all these people on the side, in these side rooms who can't even see what's going on, and thank them for their patience. So, folks, thank you very much. We'll continue reading. We'll have several more stories, and then we'll kind of throw it open for discussion. The program will formally end at 4 o'clock, and there are refreshments out for everyone. We want to be sure everyone gets the handout as well. Our next reader, of course, is Jean Engstrom, our tremendous ally for this project, and she is going to tell us about Saturday Night in Lima, 1930 style. Jean Engstrom.
Back in the 1930s, Lima and Allen County were slowly working their way out of the Depression. The WPA was established and was the primary source of laborers for the Lima Stadium, which was being built at that time. Green and Sawyer was the contractor, and my dad was the foreman on the job. Duke's dad. Folks were cautious with what little money they had and would seek entertainment and recreation that didn't cost much, if anything. On Saturday mornings, kids would either walk into downtown or ride the streetcar to Main Street, where the Lyric, the Rialto, and the Sigma theaters were. Farther out on South Main was the Majestic. On Saturday mornings, these theaters would all vie for the young customers. For your admission price, you would get one good cowboy show, an episode from a serial to keep you coming back next week, a newsreel, and a cartoon. The main show might star Hopalong Cassidy, Tom Mix, Hoot Gibson, or various other cowboys. The singing cowboys, Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, and Dale Evans, came along a little later. For the sum total of a quarter, you could buy car fare to and from the area, a movie admission, and a box of popcorn or sugar daddy. Man, we were riding in high cotton. Later in the afternoon and towards evening, the adults would begin filtering in downtown. Some men had to work 6 days a week, which included Saturday, and they and their families would be the late arrivals. People would begin jockeying for prime parking spots up and down Main Street and in the square. The people watching was about to start. Saturday night in Lima was like a big block party before the term was born. People would sit in their cars with their windows down and greet acquaintances in the passing parade. The aroma of caramel corn from Dome's Nut Shop wafted over the whole downtown area, beckoning the customers to come out and stand in line. Over in the square, the Ark of Sweets soda fountain would be busy, as would be the soda fountain in the Woolworth's 5 and Dime store. The Equity Dairy sold a unique ice cream scoop that was a slender cone of ice cream set on a sugar cone base. My folks' favorite parking spot was either on North Main in front of Feldman's department store or down on East Hyde just below Walgreens. One of the things I remember about downtown Lima is the 2 public restrooms on the northwest corner of North Street and Main by the courthouse. These restrooms were, to my young mind, the nicest and cleanest public facilities I had ever seen. You entered the men's restroom off the sidewalk on North Street by a down staircase to a basement level. It had white porcelain tiling and polished fixtures, kept very tidy. I can't speak for the ladies' restroom, but I assume it was just as nice. Its entry was on Main Street, and it was subterranean also. Those restrooms were oases, and I don't recall any graffiti or other despoiling of the walls or fixtures. As usually happens with public facilities, these become misused over time, and the restrooms eventually were closed and the entrance cemented over in the late 30s or early 40s. People from all walks of life and all the sectors of our economy would come to town on Saturday night. My folks were each raised on a farm, and so they would see and greet many of their farm friends. The stores were all open, and business flourished. My folks did a great deal of their shopping at Wright's Market on the corner of High and Union, across from the Bar Hotel. When you entered, you could smell the dill pickle barrel and the barrel with the smoked herring or blind robin. Nearby were the cheeses, with the Limburger leading the aroma barrage. These groceries had no grocery carts to push, and to get items from your list, you would hail a clerk and start telling him what you wanted. You would tell him your first item, he would go get it. Then you'd tell him your second item, he'd go get it. It was a very inefficient method, but each housewife felt as if she were being personally served. If the list was too long, the clerks got smart and would ask for the woman's list, and then they would quickly gather everything and place it on the counter. Then they would add up the cost of the items on a brown paper sack. After you paid your bill, they would bag your groceries for you and make sure that you got that sack with the figures on it as your receipt. Then you would tote your purchase off to your car. I guess I was a typically observant youngster at 5 years of age. One night, we saw a blind man with a white cane standing against a storefront on East High Street. Right here, I'm going to pass a picture on you've got to see. He was wearing a white cap and had a cup in his hand. He would sing softly, and occasionally a passerby would put a coin in his cup. He would thank them and deftly pour the coin into his other hand and pocket it. On a subsequent Saturday, my folks and I parked on East High Street. When my folks started heading for Wright's Market, I asked them if I could stay in the car, and Mom said yes. I had smuggled a tin cup into the back seat when we left home. This picture going around, you've just got to see it to see what he looked like at that time, innocent little kid. When I saw my folks disappear into Wright's, I got out of the car and pulled my ball cap down, backed up to a dark storefront, held out my cup, and began to sing. Every once in a while I would open one eye and look into the cup, but alas, no coins were there. So I might close my eyes and begin again. I guess I was singing Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam because I didn't know anything else at the age of 5. Well, that went on for a while when, whoosh, all of a sudden my feet left the sidewalk. The rear door to our car was open and I was summarily deposited therein. I heard my mom say brusquely, "Start the car, Emmett, let's go." I could hear my dad chuckling as he backed out of the parking place and off we went. I don't recall that I got back to go to Wright's with Mom for a long time. They must have missed me over there, though, because they closed that store and moved out onto Spencerville Road and became Wright's IGA food liner, complete with grocery carts as though to attract me back. And that, incidentally, was about the time when the whole downtown started to fold. Speaking of folding, we used to have a restaurant called Jack and Yoshi's, and later Jack's Cafeteria, run by 2 immigrants from Japan. I don't recall exactly, but I think Jack and Yoshi's closed not too long after Pearl Harbor. Jack's Cafeteria, where I first tasted chop suey and chow mein, was across the street from the old High Street Market, which was a cosmos of its own. All in all, we had quite a nice downtown. We had Greg's Department Store, Feldman's Department Store, the Leader Store, Blem's Store, in addition to J.C. Penney's, Sears Roebuck, and Montgomery Ward's and Blattner's store. So, as I say, Saturday night in Lima was like a block party before there was such a thing, and I think Jesus still wants me for a sunbeam, even if I did make Mom angry.
Thank you, Gene. We hear a lot about Dad's friends when you talk to him, and also in his book. We hear about Bob Creviston and Art Neff and Jack Lytle. And he has a story that fills out the picture a little more, and it's called Some of My Best Friends Were Dogs. So we'd like to share that with you now. Many a happy day during my growing up years was spent playing with our pet dogs. Let me tell you about some of them. The first dog that came into my life you've already heard about today, called Queen. She was an older beagle with popping eyes and a gray muzzle. She was a three-family dog, with Spidels to the west, and then the Murrays, and then Perry Anderson to the east. She lined whichever backyard had the most shade. Unfortunately, she got prime table scraps from both sides, and she became too fat to run rabbits very well. But Perry Anderson would come out of his back door and give a melodious whistle reserved just for Queen. If she was in our house, she'd be frantic until we let her out. Then off she'd go with Perry to Baxter's Woods. Perry would harvest his night crawlers and green moss for his dew worms, while Queen sniffed for rabbits. They'd return in a couple of hours, and both had their tongues hanging out. Queen died one morning while I was in school, and when I came home at noon, I was devastated to have lost my dear old friend. But Perry was equally as devastated, and he missed her as much as I did. My dad also missed having a beagle around the house. He liked to take them out and listen to them bell as they would chase a rabbit. I think I was about 10 years old at around this time, because in 1935 was when McKinley Cantor published the book The Voice of Bugle Ann. I got it from the library, and I read it, and I had Dad read it too. The book was about a foxhound named Bugle Ann with a beautiful belling voice. And a foxhound actually looks a lot like an oversized beagle, standing about 20 inches at the shoulder, but the largest beagle only reaches about 15 inches or less in height. Well, that book stoked my dad's fire. And so, one Sunday, found my dad, Mom, and me on our way to Cincinnati to a sporting dog show. The highways were very icy, and when we got to Piqua, about 40 miles from Lima, Mom wanted to turn around and go home. But Dad persisted, and we drove the 120 miles to the dog show. There we saw a perky little beagle who was such a friendly little dog, and he won his class in the show, though not best of breed for the beagles. Dad went over and talked to the owner, who had several dogs in the show. The dog that we liked was American Kennel Club registered under the name of War Cry II. He'd won several field trials and several bench shows, but his owner thought that he was a little temperamental and he wasn't good enough to become a field trial champion, which is what he really wanted. So Dad got the owner's name and address and phone number and the asking price for this little gem of a dog. All the way back to Lima, all Dad and I could talk about was this wonderful little dog. Mom said he was nice, but she didn't know if we could afford $35 for a dog. In 1935, that was a chunk. But Dad pestered Mom long enough till she gave in. He wrote the owner, sent him a check, and the owner sent us our dream dog by Railway Express. What a joy it was when I came home from school one day, and there he was, American Kennel Club papers and all, War Cry II. His name was indeed War Cry II, but his owner explained to us after we bought him that he would actually only answer to the name Ace. Well, things went pretty well with our dog Ace until one winter's day when my mom came home from the store. She came in the side door, set her bags of groceries down on the floor, went to the front door and got the evening's newspaper. She took off her coat and stood over a hot air register to get warm while she read the obituary columns. Suddenly, she became aware of the sound of paper rustling. She went to check her bag of groceries, and there she witnessed Ace just finishing off a pound of bacon. She let out a whoop, picked up the newspaper, and chased that poor dog from the kitchen to the dining room to the living room, then back to the kitchen, swatting him all the time with the newspaper. The poor dog got so upset that he vomited his bacon out on the carpet. Then I had to rescue him and take him out to his kennel. Mom wouldn't even let him back in the house for a week. But they finally made up. Now, Dad had been talking about having a brace or a pair of beagles to hunt together. And so he also bought a dog a little taller than Ace. His name was Vic. When a beagle is hunting, his tail is referred to as his flag. And sometimes when he is hunting in heavy brush, all you can really see is his flag. Vic had a good flag, but he wasn't near the hunter that Ace was, and he was a little mean to Ace, not the thing to be. So Dad traded Vic for another dog named Sniffer. This dog looked more like a basset hound than a beagle, and because of his shorter legs, he was much slower. Well, when we'd gone to Cincinnati, I had really been impressed by that dog show that we saw. And that was the dog show where we found Ace. Well, one day I saw an article in the newspaper that there was going to be a sporting dog show on Labor Day over in Dunkirk at the Leafy Oaks Coon Dog Field Trials. Colonel Leon Robinson was sponsoring the show, it said. I thought I'd write and get the details and maybe even enter ourselves. I prevailed upon Mom and Dad to let me enter Ace in the show. I sent in his registration and the entry fees, but I only had about a month to work with Ace. I trotted him on his leash, and I taught him to stand still on the bench and hold up his tail, not to flinch when the judge would lift his lips to check his teeth. While I was working with Ace, my older brother Marvin would smirk, and he'd give me reason after reason why I was wasting my time. He said Ace's muzzle wasn't trim enough. So I took Dad's barber scissors and I cut Ace's whiskers flush. Well, the day came, and Mom, Dad, and I went to Dunkirk along with Ace to the dog show. I won't drag it out, but suffice it to say that Ace won Best of Class, Best of Breed, and he went on to win Best of Show. When we got home, my formerly scornful brother opined that he'd given me the right pointers to produce a show winner. This was heady stuff for an 11-year-old kid. And I liked these dog shows, and the next spring I read about another big sporting dog show to be held in Ravenna, Ohio in the early summer. It was to be held in the middle of the week, though, and Dad had to work, but I did successfully prevail upon Mom to take me and Ace to the show. It was about 100 miles away, and we got there in time, but I found out that most of the men and women showing dogs were professionals, and they made their living doing this. Well, Ace and I, therefore, became the sentimental favorites of the crowd. And when Ace won Best of Class and Best of Breed, I had a regular cheering section when it came to Best of Show competition. I had to go to the restroom, so I told Mom to hold Ace's leash. While I was in there, I overheard the judge talking to some of the men, and he said, "We can't let this kid walk away with this prize, or the trainers won't be back next year." So out we came, and they called for the finalist dogs in the Best of Show category to enter the arena. And Ace strutted like he knew what he had to do to win, and the crowd was with us. But a beautiful Irish setter was awarded Best of Show, and Ace got second place. The judge called us aside and congratulated us and suggested that I get cinders into his run to toughen his feet and make him more bouncy and other things. I just smiled up at him and I said, "I understand." We didn't get home till 11 o'clock that night. My dad and brothers were worried sick. They called the highway patrol and the sheriff's department to see if there'd been any accidents reported. So that was the last dog show for Ace and me. But another beagle owner in the area had seen Ace, and he propositioned Dad to have Ace sire some puppies from his female. The terms were that we'd get the pick of the litter. Came the day, and Dad and I went to pick up the puppy, and there was the male pup, the spitting image of Ace. And so we took possession of Warcry III. He was later to be called Pippy, though, for two reasons. Number one, he was a pip of a pup. And number two, he pippied on the floor rather than on the newspapers. When Pippy came, we sold Sniffer, and so we just had two dogs, father and son. Since we had to concern ourselves with Pippy's education and make him able to hunt, Dad helped me to make a lightweight trailer mounted on bicycle wheels, and I could pull this easily behind my bike. I would load the two dogs into their trailer and fasten it to my bike, and off we'd go out to Robb Avenue and then on farther west about a quarter of a mile. And there we'd find a lane that had been worn into the ground by ruts, and we'd go on back into the woods and brambles. I think this area years later was developed and became Englewood Estates. Ace was the teacher and Pippy was the pupil, and together they made beautiful music trailing rabbits. The next November, when hunting season was just a week off, I began making plans to get out of school on opening day so I could go hunting with my dad and brothers. I'd acquired a new Ithaca Featherlight 20-gauge pump shotgun, and I was most anxious to try it out. School principal said I could not be let out until noon of opening day. But Dad and my brother said they couldn't wait for me because they had to go about 50 miles where the pheasants were most plentiful. So they wouldn't wait for me at all. And so when I got out at noon, I just put my dogs in their trailer and slung my shotgun in its case over my shoulder, and we went off to our usual Robb Avenue training grounds. That afternoon, I got 2 cocked pheasants and 2 rabbits, and I put my dogs in their trailer, and we went triumphantly home. About 3 hours later, my dad and brothers returned, and they'd been skunked. That's what they get for not waiting for me. I didn't let them forget my prowess for quite a while. When my folks moved out to their new house and farm on Stewart Road, Pippy wasn't used to the speeding vehicles on the country road, and he got hit by a car. We took him to one of my childhood heroes, Dr. Joseph Morris, our veterinarian. Turned out that Pippy was lucky, and he only had a lower spinal injury. However, this resulted in a paralyzed tail, and from then on, whenever he'd hunt, we could never see his flag. I'd gone to college in 1943, and one day I got a letter from Mom telling me that Ace had died, and Dad had buried him under a beautiful big elm tree in our pasture about 100 yards from the barn. The next time I went home, I went up to the barn to help out, and I saw Pippy sitting beside Ace's grave. We called him, and he trotted very slowly to us, and all the while he kept looking back at his father's grave. Back in college, I was called to active Army duty in a flurry of travel. I had basic training in Texas and X-ray technology school in Atlanta, and then after a 10-day furlough home, I got to visit Mom, Dad, and Pippy. I returned to Texas and was assigned to the 241st General Hospital. They moved me by train to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, which was a staging area for going to Europe. I ended up in France, and while I was in France, I got word from Mom that Pippy had died, and Dad had buried him beside Ace, his father. And so, my friends, very sadly, the dog days of my youth came to their close.
This is a tribute to Uncle Charlie, my cousin Roberta's father. Most of us have had a favorite uncle or aunt as we were growing up. My uncle was Charlie Schilling, who was married to Lula Showalter, my mother's older sister. Uncle Charlie and Aunt Lou lived about 25 miles northeast of Lima. They lived on an 80-acre farm where they grew corn, wheat, oats, soybeans, and alfalfa hay. Charlie also had 5 or 6 milk cows and hogs, both for market and for their own use. Aunt Lou raised white leghorn chickens for eggs and for frying. She also had a big garden. In addition to all this, Uncle Charlie drove a rural school bus for Adola, and he had to furnish his own bus to do it. So he must have really liked kids. They had a large windmill and tower adjacent to their house that supported a most wondrous grape arbor that grew the most delicious white grapes that were ever so refreshing when you came in out of a hot field. Uncle Charlie and Aunt Lou had 2 children, a boy named Russell and a girl named Roberta. I never met or knew Russell as he died of a spinal meningitis and possible skull fracture from a fall. He had been the light of Uncle Charlie's life, and his loss was a terrible blow. Perhaps that's why Uncle Charlie was always so friendly to me, as I must have represented the boy he lost and longed for. Uncle Charlie would frequently ask me when I was going to come up and help him on the farm. I thought he was just kidding me, but as I got older and bigger and could really maybe be of some use to him, I realized that he would really like for me to come. Well, my mom and dad urged me to go and stay for a week and see what life on the farm was like, and they promised to come and get me right on schedule. So I decided to try it early one summer when Uncle Charlie was ready to make hay. For those without much farming background, like I was most of the time and still am a great deal, I should explain the difference between straw and hay, since people sometimes confuse the two. Straw is for bedding and the hay is for food for the animals. Straw is the dried stalks of wheat or oats after it is harvested. The threshing machine was used to blow the straw into huge stacks called straw stacks. The straw would be used throughout the year as bedding for the cows, horses, and sheep. Also in the chicken houses for nests. Straw is not food for the cattle and horses. They won't eat it. So it makes excellent bedding in the stables and milking barn. Sometimes they appear to want to eat it when it's baled because a stalk of wheat maybe has a whole grain of a head of grain hanging out. They'll grab that by mistake, there's really no nutrition in straw, and the animals basically don't eat it. Hay is usually made from either alfalfa or red or sweet clover or timothy or mixtures of the three. And when Uncle Charlie would have to get the field crop ready to be turned into hay, he'd mow it down and then rake it into windrows with a side delivery rake. Then he always had to let the hay cure in the field for a day or so, depending on the weather and drying conditions. At the waiting time like that, when there wasn't anything I could to do to help in the field, mowing the job and using the side delivery rake was a one-man job, and 2 mules. Aunt Lou and I would sneak over to New Stark, where there was a little general store that sold ice. She would get a chunk of ice on the bumper of the old Chevrolet, and we would go home. And we would chip it into pieces and make a freezer of ice cream. She filled the container with the mixture, and then I did the cranking. Then after supper, we would surprise Uncle Charlie with a big bowl of homemade ice cream. We would all eat ice cream all evening because they didn't have a refrigerator to freeze it, and we had to eat it all or the smell. And I never met a man who liked ice cream better than Uncle Charlie, and probably that's why I like it so well today. The next day, we'd usually be ready to start. Uncle Charlie would hook the hay loader onto the back of the hay wagon, and then he would teach me how to drive old Maud and Jack, his beloved team of mules. I would drive the wagon down the windrows of hay while he took the hay coming up from the hay loader and placed it on the wagon to make an even load. Once we had a wagon load, we would unhook the hay loader from the wagon and head for the barn. Uncle Charlie would back the wagon into the barn. Then he unhitched the mules from the wagon and rehitched them to the ropes and pulleys hanging from the pulleys in the top of the barn. He taught me how to stick the hay forks. And incidentally, in our farm display downstairs, there are some identical hay forks to the kind I used to stick. Wow. He taught me how to stick the hay forks into the hay and hold it together, and then he would drive the mules forward and pull the hay up into the hay mow. And then when it got up to the top, it would go down this track. And when it got to where we wanted it, I'd pull the trip rope, and the whole hay would drop into a spot in the hay loft. Then we'd start all over again. That was really an enjoyable. Thank you. That was really an enjoyable thing for this city boy to learn. I felt so proud to be useful. I loved it. Towards the end of the week, I was getting a little homesick and would go out in the front yard and look down the road for my folks' car. Over the span of 5 or 6 years, Uncle Charlie introduced me to so many things. I learned about threshing circles, which were groups of 10 or 12 farmers who would join together to help harvest each other's crops of wheat and oats, with tremendous dinners at noon that the farm wives prepared for the men. And here I want to take a comma. In Uncle Charlie's circle for threshing of wheat and oats was a farmer down the road by the name of Lee Tressel. Lee Tressel had a son named Lee Tressel, who also worked shoulder to shoulder with me on the threshing cycles and threshing circles. And Lee Tressel is the father of the current Jim Tressel, Ohio State University football coach. But I didn't know it back then. Well, I learned about detasseling hybrid corn. I used to get 25 cents an hour from the bossies across the road who raised hybrid seed corn. And I learned about butchering hogs in the winter. One of the best things I learned from Uncle Charlie was hunting and sportsmanship. Uncle Charlie was a staunch conservationist. Woe be unto any hunter who shot a hen pheasant or exceeded the daily bag limit of pheasants or rabbits. Shut up. Is that middle C? Yeah, now this is doing it. Okay.
Try it.
All right. Well, Uncle Charlie was a staunch conservationist. He will be any hunter who shot a hen or pheasant or exceeded the daily bag limit of pheasants or rabbits. They'd never again be allowed to hunt on Uncle Charlie's land. When the winters were severe, he would carry buckets of shelled corn back to the woods for pheasants, squirrels, and rabbits. He would make brush piles, and he always let his fence rows grow to give nesting birds cover. In the latter part of 1942, when I was 17, Uncle Charlie became seriously ill, and on January 20th, 1943, a month after his daughter Roberta was married, he passed away. I remember telling my dad the news when he got home from work that day. It was the first time I had ever seen my father weep, as he and Charlie were the closest of friends. The funeral was in the same church where Roberta had just been married. In those days, the body always lay in state in the living room of the family home. On the day of the funeral, I was standing out in the middle of the road as the pallbearers brought the casket from the house to the funeral coach. Just as they were placing the casket into the hearse, a rooster and a hen pheasant came up out of the ditch by Garish's field and cackled as they flew directly over the casket as it was being loaded. In that moment, I knew that Uncle Charlie was in God's hands and that he had sent his two messengers to assure us all and to pay a last and fitting tribute to Uncle Charlie. I waited almost 60 years to write this, and it's been in my memory bank ever since the funeral and the pheasant flyover. This piece is just seed for many more stories about Uncle Charlie and my interactions with him and Aunt Lou and country cousin Roberta. And I think that it would be a good thing for the museum here, or some organization here, to start a memoirs class and grow your own historians. Because what's happened here over these years, and it's happening now, is important years down the road. And it's always important to the person that writes them and their families.